Back to the channel. Just wanted to sit down and do another little video. It's been a little while since I've done a nice little midweek video that wasn't a breaking news or anything like that. Things have definitely slowed down on the channel a little bit, and part of that is because as things are starting to warm up a little bit in the summer, I think folks are getting out there slowly but surely. In Canada, we're still kind of locked down a little bit, but obviously people, let's be realistic about this. Within certain level of responsibility, the majority of us, it's not like we're locked in our homes. Let's be a little bit more realistic than that. But so obviously things are still kind of closed down, especially compared to what it is down south, where things are starting to open up a little bit more. But as people go outside, I think they're spending a little bit less time inside, focusing too much on the hobby stuff. Plus, you have all the other aspects of it, which will segue into mentioning that I am going to be doing the live stream on Friday, and that is going to be the schedule going forward for a little bit. So just kind of reiterating that. That's going to be the plan going for now. This weekend is a little bit interesting just because we have a long weekend. So I don't know, maybe if the spirit moves me, maybe I'll do a little Sunday stream. We'll see, because I do have the Monday off, so that is beneficial, but I'm not going to promise anything. The Friday stream is happening for sure. And depending on what's going on, I may even feel like opening up the link to just the general public, whoever wants to pop on and chat. We can talk about anything hobby-wise or anything else. But there's definitely been a slowdown in terms of hobby news. Obviously, there's still stuff going on. Even as I speak tonight on Thursday night, the first PWCC Premier Auction is closing off. Obviously, we had the thing going on this past week that Target has started to move towards, Target is now officially moved out of having retail inside of their stores. For now, it is meant to be temporary, is what they say. We'll see long term. I've expressed previously the opinion that it wouldn't shock me if this stayed going forward, at least as long as the hobby remained this hot. It's not really worth it to deal with a lot of the hassle that a lot of these Targets and Walmarts and other retail outlets are having to deal with folks that are a little bit overzealous. But just to be clear, I don't blame the cards, because at the end of the day, it's a financial thing. If the cards weren't worth anything, they'd be a bunch of blaster boxes sitting at Target and Walmart and all that, gathering dust as we speak. The reality is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If nobody bought on the secondary market, there would be no secondary market other than just that base price. And there would be almost no incentive to camp out. There'd be no incentive for, violence. There'd be no incentive for people fighting over, boxes with pieces of cardboard in them. But that's, an entirely different conversation. But aside from that kind of stuff, there really isn't a lot going on. Obviously, there'll still be auctions and things like that. The hobby moves on, and prices on a lot of stuff have also stagnated, which has obviously taken the wind out of the sails. You'll notice there's a little bit less content out there. I try to be consistent in the sense that I still am happy to do the live streams. I do my pickup videos every week because that's part of the collecting. What's funny is that even though things have quote unquote slowed down, collectors like myself, we're still picking up stuff. We're still finding stuff for the collection. I've actually found this to be a particularly good week. When I get to show off what's coming in this week, there's some stuff I'm very happy to add to the collection, some stuff I'm proud of, and some stuff that I enjoyed picking up. And anybody who sees my Instagram or is on the Instagram will get a little bit of a sneak preview of that. But anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way. We'll do the live stream on Friday. That'll be the first thing. And then we'll still talk about anything that happens to come up between now and then. Not too much, but we'll talk a little bit about it. One thing we'll mention, I think briefly, and I'll talk about it now just for a second, is that PSA did an update on their website in their Customer Communication Center. Very nicely named. It's a very short update. They're just saying that as of the 18th of this month, so May 18th, PSA says they're completely caught up on order entry. Let's be clear, they're talking about order entry. So they do explain, though. That's nice. In other words, all PSA submissions have been entered into the PSA system, with the exception of a few problem orders. So they put some caveats here: no signature, incorrect card count, missing payment method, which are reasons why you wouldn't be able to input those into the system and things you'd have to follow up with the customers. So that's fair enough. In related news, PSA's temporary suspension of the acceptance of value, economy, regular, and express submissions is still in effect. We expect to take a tiered approach to reintroducing these service levels beginning on July the 1st. So to be clear, and this is consistent with what they said before, it is going to be likely a tiered approach. So it's not going to like July 1st rolls on and then suddenly they flip the switch. It's going to be like maybe a couple of these levels will come back. Don't hold your breath on value or economy being in that first group to come in. It'll probably most likely be something like express, maybe regular, but most likely express. That would be my guess just for now. And then after July 1st, we'll see how it goes. And then obviously as they continue to make some progress on some of these submissions and get stuff out there, then it'll get interesting. Now, there's definitely been some controversy as far as grades, and there's been some controversy as far as some customer service elements that I've seen in different YouTube channels. Like I said, the content has slowed down, but that doesn't mean you don't hear from some people, which is kind of fun. It does make it a lot easier, though, as we've gotten into this warmer weather. It does make it a lot easier to be able to sit back and kind of keep up with what's going on, because the volume has definitely slowed down a little bit. Current Collectors Club memberships have already been extended 3 months and will be extended further to reflect the duration of the value pricing suspension. We will refresh this update regularly to share progress and updates on timing. So that's the update from PSA. Like I said, it didn't warrant its whole video. I'm just including it as part of this video here at the beginning. And we may talk about it a little bit more on Friday if there's anything of interest for anybody to talk about from PSA, SGC, BGS, anything you guys want. I do leave it open as far as that's concerned. And if you have any ideas between now and then, feel free to suggest them either on this video or on the post I do on Instagram. Those are the easiest ways to reach me and to give me a little bit of feedback if there's something in particular you would like to discuss or talk about. And you're more than welcome to. Okay, so real quick today, one thing I wanted to talk about is I wanted to talk about comps for a moment. Take a couple of minutes because I haven't done a little bit of a deep dive video into a topic in a little bit, and I do like doing these from time to time. And I'll tell you what inspired me, and I'll walk you through the rabbit hole that leads me to kind of what I wanted to talk about here today. So I was listening to an audiobook. I'm not going to call it reading because an audiobook to me is not reading, but I was listening to the audiobook for this book here, The Psychology of Money. Timeless Lessons on Wealth, Greed, and Happiness. It's an interesting book. Not a very long listen. I would say it's probably not a long read. I'll be honest, I don't know how many pages it is, but it didn't seem to me like it was too much. 256 pages, so that's not too bad. Very interesting. It focuses on, this, as the title suggests, the psychology of money, which is great. I think it's a good angle that more people should take because the reality is that plays extremely well into the real market as far as that's concerned. And a lot of things that happen in the hobby now are based on what the psychology of the way that people react to things affects decision making, really. I'm trying to kind of try to word this correctly, but what I'm trying to get at here is that when you look at somebody who's looking at the current, like we'll call it a downturn, we'll call it a pullback, whatever you want to say, a correction. The reality is, yes, it is. But it's comparatively to all-time highs, and it's comparatively to what people had recently become acclimated to, which was not historical. It normally doesn't go up as fast as it's gone the last year or so. So having a sudden pullback feels jarring. It shakes some people. But then I saw a meme, I think it was Lameme James that put it on there, or somebody else had a meme where they were talking about a person who was acting like they were drowning because suddenly, things were down 20 or 30%. And then underneath it showed in the last year, their card had gone up like 800%. And I go, so yeah, it's gone up 800% in the last year, but in the last month or two, it's gone down 20%, which means you're still way, 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 way up. Now, if you're somebody who's been buying in recently at the all-time highs, well, then for you, this is misery. But if you were somebody who got in at a lower cost level, years ago, you're laughing because you're still multiples of where it was a year ago, or even 2 years ago, or heaven forbid, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. But it's all perspective. It's not. People feel the pain of a loss more than the exhilaration of a gain. And that's part of the psychology part. But there was something in particular in this book that I wanted to focus on. And not just my inability to spell the word psychology. I noticed that just now. It's like, no, it's with PS. But anyway, that's my bad. But there was something in particular in this book that I saw. And it was talking about Benjamin Graham. And this is great because I love bringing in to videos like this areas outside of the hobby itself, in economics, in different theories and things like that, because to me, a lot of the hobby mentality behind a lot of this stuff is overly simplistic. And it's funny to me because it's like, if you just look beyond this little tunnel that you've put yourself into, a lot of this stuff's already been reviewed or looked at or considered in different areas. I talk about other hobbies and other types of collectibles, but I can also talk about economics in general. And like, this stuff's out there. This isn't new. So specifically when you mentioned the Benjamin Graham example, it was great because it gave me the opportunity to go down this rabbit hole that I'd been wanting to. I've been wanting to make this video for some time, but I was looking for the right example, the right opportunity to talk about it. And the general topic that I want to talk about is I want to talk about comps. I want to talk about how comps really are a guide above all else and how we've lost that kind of mentality in the way that people treat comps. But first, before I get to that, I want to take from the psychology of money, I want to shift back over to Benjamin Graham, who he references. There's two things you need to know about Benjamin Graham if you're not familiar. One is that he is the person who authored The Intelligent Investor, because if you scroll down here, it does reference The Intelligent Investor here. So it is a very common financial book to be referenced. And also Security Analysis, which is one of his most famous books that he came out with. And between that and The Intelligent Investor, they were the Bible for Warren Buffett. Obviously a very noteworthy investor in his own right, being one of the richest men in the world. But the interesting thing about it is that Benjamin Graham himself through the course of his lifetime, took things like security analysis, which is extremely technical, very dense. You have to really be interested in that kind of thing if you want to read into it. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. Intelligent Investor is pretty good. It might be worth a read if you are interested in the psychology of kind of investing and the history of it. And, you can definitely pull some principles out of it that might still be useful to you. But an important thing that I wanted to make note of is that through the course of his lifetime, he did multiple additions during the course of his lifetime to make certain adjustments, including with security analysis. Now, you would think to yourself, security analysis is a very dense tome that was very carefully researched, and formulas and things were created. Basically, this is the father of value investing. It's somebody who really focuses on taking the data and really trying to find ways to find value, in his case, in stocks. So why would somebody who took such pains to come up with these theories and these calculations and these different formulas, why would he need to review it and then update it several times through the course of his lifetime? Well, the answer is kind of plays into this comps thing, and I'll kind of tie it all together at the end. Some of these videos do take a little while to get to, so you have to stick with me. So let me quickly go to Benjamin Graham, because one thing he referenced in the Psychology of Money book here, Morgan Housel mentioned about Benjamin Graham, was actually really useful, and I found the article. I'm not going to read you the article, but I'll give you a quick excerpt from it. So it's called A Conversation with Benjamin Graham, and this was in 1976, and this was in a publication called the Financial Analyst Journal. So this was in the September-October 1976 edition of this journal. This is right towards the end of his life. And it asked Benjamin Graham, it's publishing a question and answer session with Benjamin Graham, who is mentioned here, the senior author of Security Analysis. I think it was him and I believe a gentleman named Dodd. The rest of the name escapes me. But he specifically answered some questions related to the stock market and related to investment and Wall Street and all that. And there's some good pieces here that I think might be useful for you to think about as I get into the comps themselves, talking about that. So he said, they put here, in light of your 60 odd years of experience in Wall Street, because by this point he was already towards the end of his life and he had had this long period of time, a multi-time published author, and also had been reworking these books that had become already well known in the industry, in the space. So he goes, what is your overall view of common stocks? Now you may be asking, why am I talking about stocks in a card video? Stick with me, just hang on. Common stocks have one important investment characteristic and one important speculative characteristic. Their investment value and average market price tend to increase irregularly but persistently over the decades. As their net worth builds up through the reinvestment of undistributed earnings, I'm not going to skip past some of this. Scrolling down. However, most of the time, common stocks are subject to irrational and excessive price fluctuations in both directions. As the consequence of the ingrained tendency of most people to speculate or gamble, i.e. give way to hope, fear, and greed. Stop me if this sounds familiar. And this is 1976. So anyway, next. What is your view of Wall Street as a financial institution? A highly unfavorable, even a cynical one. The stock exchanges appear to be chiefly a John Bunyan type of Vanity Fair, frequently generates in a madhouse, a tale full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. The stock market resembles a large laundry in which the instruments in large blocks, let me skip ahead a little bit here, without true rhyme or reason, but technologically it is remarkably well organized. And this is in his perception in 1976 compared to what he had experienced. So what is your view of the financial community as a whole? Most of the stockbrokers, financial analysts, investment advisors are above average in intelligence, business honesty, and sincerity, but they lack adequate experience with all types of security markets and an overall understanding of common stocks, or what I call the nature of the beast. They tend to take the market and themselves too seriously. They spend a large part of their time trying, valiantly and ineffectively, to do things they can't do well. There are some little nuggets in there. Like I said, it's about a 4 or 5 page article. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but I wanted to take a couple of these snippets from this first page here, and we'll continue down this thread here in a moment. The point is, a lot of this applies to any kind of market like this, even going back to 1976. So I go back almost 50 years, and I can find somebody talking about the stock market, which is a much more sophisticated market, which has existed a much longer time than sports cards and things like that as a market. And yet the same problem lies, because wherever there's a psychology element, that's why I started with the psychology of money at the beginning of this portion of the discussion. The reason why I began with that is that psychology is so important in how the market works, in how people react to the market. It doesn't matter how much data you insert into it. The psychology still matters. Now that brings me to comps. So let me talk about that for a moment. Okay, so I'm going to start off with comps in real estate because that's the most logical. Again, I'm not going to give you a full description and whatever, but let me quickly go through it. All you need to understand is a comp is an abbreviation for comparable sale. Why does this matter? Now, most of you are like, well, duh. I know. Yes, I understand that, but you'd be surprised how many people are new to this. They'll use the word comp. They'll say it a million times and not actually have any idea what the hell that means. What all it really means is that if I've got a 3-bedroom house and I want to compare it to a 3-bedroom house, ideally of the same size, ideally of the same type, maybe the same, build year, as many things that are the same as possible to make it as comparable as possible. Because if it doesn't match, if I take a 3-bedroom house in the middle of a slum, it could be completely renovated from the inside out. It could look beautiful, but it's still going to be worth less than a slightly dilapidated 3-bedroom house in a highly popular place that with a little fix up suddenly becomes $1 million house. They're both 3 bedrooms. They're both similar configuration. What's the difference? Well, they're not actually valid comparables, because even though they might have the same basic structure, they're not the same. Sports cards can play like this too. I can take a Tom Brady rookie card and take another Tom Brady rookie card, and one is a PSA 9, one is a PSA 10. They're not exactly the same. One is a BGS 9, one is a PSA 9. It's not exactly the same. One is, an SGC, one is whatever. There's a bunch of different little variations that you can have that make them not apples to apples. But a comparable, in theory, you're comparing apples to apples as much as possible. So the important thing about this, and the kind of the point that I want to make in this video here towards the end, I don't want to make it too long, so I'm going to get to the point here. And the point is, comps are great. The data that you have is great. But like I mentioned in the first part of this section, psychology is really important. It's how you perceive it. Because a comp, really at the end of the day, is like the old Beckett price guides. It's a guide. It's something meant to help you. But I want to give you an example. I want to give you a concrete example of a card that I've actually purchased myself. And then let's quickly think through this exercise a little bit. And in another video, I'll spend a little bit more time on the psychology piece, but I want to give you a really basic primer on this idea. And I'm going to use a real card with a real value where I can tell you exactly what I paid for it, and I'll compare it to some comparables that are apples to apples as much as we can. So let's quickly do that. So I'm going to go to my Instagram here, and I'm going to pull up one of my posts. And in this post, I have a 2019-2020 Upper Deck Clear Cut metal. They called it metal, but it's, they call the insert kind of palladium. It's like a see-through acetate card with a blue paint pen on it. It's a nice looking concept, nice looking card. It's pretty neat. The blue paint pen looks nice. This one I mentioned when I did my pickup video for it is that these are notorious for, unfortunately, the paint pen getting smudged because of the way they produced it, where I think at some point they stacked them on top of each other. So it is not uncommon for the card to be smudged. This happens more often than you'd like to think. So basically you could buy a card where like the signature is compromised. The cards themselves are not super common. I wouldn't call them uber rare, but they're definitely not common. As a result, though, it means that there were some very big price fluctuations at the beginning, and that's going to lead me into the comp thing that we were talking about a moment ago. So let's go here for a second, and here is the specific one. This is the one that I actually purchased. It was $80 Canadian with $10 shipping. It was an offer that I made. It was a best offer, and I'm going to get to an important point about this in a second. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to use Terapeak to help me out with that. So Terapeak here is showing these prices in US dollars. So the average sold price for the last couple of months for these is about just under $90. Now that is the average, and then the average shipping is about $9.46. So let's call it just shy of $100 on average. Okay, so on average. But this is where comps become important. Right now I've got these in order from most recent to oldest. So here's a question for you. Let's say we were trying to work out a comp. Like I said, a comp is a guide. A comp is to help you as a seller try to figure out what to sell it for, and as a buyer to try to figure out what to offer. But you shouldn't consider yourself bound to this, because this is important. What if I took the average of these over the last couple of months and said, okay, so the average price should be about $90. Okay, so I'll offer $90. Well, you could, but the last one sold for $52.07 as an auction with $3 shipping US. Well, that's a lot less. Well, then this one here that I'm going to show you, $63.81. This is the American translation of that purchase, because if I click on this right now to open it up, this is the one that I bought, the exact same one I showed you a second ago. It was $80 Canadian. So it works out to about 63, let's call it $64 US, and then about $8, American in terms of shipping. So quote unquote, I overpaid compared to the most recent. But if you go back to the first one that sold in this grouping here on March the 13th, they paid in an auction, mind you, $224.09. That wasn't an auction. It was an open thing. It wasn't like a best offer where somebody didn't know what the market was. Nobody knew what the market was at that moment. It's the first one that really came up in this grouping here. Well, if I scroll down, here's the card. It was $280 Canadian. I paid $80 Canadian. This person paid $280 Canadian. It was 74 bids. Now you could say shill bidding, you could say a bunch of stuff, or it could just be that it was one of the first ones that came up and nobody knew what the price was, so people took a shot in the dark, and then as time went on, the market figured itself out. So let me zoom in on this one a little bit. So you can see this one actually has kind of a smeared autograph. So a couple of important considerations here that I want to throw at you. Let's say we were in the market for this. So we could say, okay, so as a comp, you were going to make an offer on one. Let's say you have the opportunity to make a seller an offer. So what are you offering? Are you offering 52.07 because that's the most recent? Are you offering 224.09 because that was the biggest price? Well, as a seller, you would want to try to get close to this. As a buyer, you want to try to get close to this. Well, maybe we look at the average because look, there's a $44.79 one there, $56, $84, $90 fixed price. So maybe you say, okay, let's take the auction ones. Let's ignore the fixed price and best offer because that could be anything. Obviously, we'll ignore the first one because it's a bit of an outlier. So you see, we're making these distinctions. We're taking this data set now and we're starting to slice it out. So not all these components are useful to build a good comp because now you're like trying to figure something out. And that introduces a little something that is important when we're talking about comps. Even if you get a good one in terms of good data set. So you sit there and you're trying to figure this out, right? So we've got this information in front of us. We're trying to figure out what we should offer. Well, you got to take shipping into consideration, of course, because that's part of your price. So do you include that in the comp? But if you're in a card show, say, for example, well, there's no shipping involved. So how do you factor that in? Oh, well, you say, well, as a seller on eBay, well, you're paying, eBay fees as well, and you're not having to do that here. Can you cut me a break on price based on that? Okay, how much is that worth? So all of a sudden, we've got all these variables that are adjusting the price here and there, and it could throw these comps way off in both directions. Obviously, the seller wants to get as much as possible. You as the buyer want to get it as cheap as possible. So what's the proper price? Do you just remove the highest and the lowest and try to get an average in between? Do you remove the best offer buy it nows? Do you just stick to the ones that are auction? Is there shield building involved? Like there's so many variables here. And this is with something where we're pretty close to apples to apples. Oh, by the way, what about a smudged autograph versus a nice autograph? Mine has a nice autograph. It's pretty clean. So in theory, this should be worth more than one that's put beside it side by side. So I didn't pay the lowest, I didn't pay the highest, I paid somewhere in between, but I have one of the ones with a cleaner autograph. So in theory, that should be worth more. Maybe. It depends on the card. I would argue yes, but it very much depends on... It's the same way that when you're buying a patch card, for example, where you're generally going to pay a premium for a nicer patch. Boring white patch or, single color patch that is the bare minimum to be considered a patch is probably not going to be as exciting as a card with different breaks and different seams and things like that. It's not the same thing. You'd probably pay a premium for that. Those are the kinds of... So all of a sudden you got the same card side by side of each other, but they're suddenly not valid comps because you got an exciting, beautiful patch that might be more appealing to some folks versus one that's kind of boring. It takes us back to that real estate comparison. What about a house? What about the two houses? They're identical in every possible way, but one of them was well taken care of and one of them looks like crap. Well, you're going to pay more, most likely, for the one that's already kind of turnkey. You just show up, everything's great, you're good to go. Just live in it. Versus the one, well, I got to do a little bit of work. Let me factor that into my price and my offer. Last point I want to make about this. So using this example here, in this case, for the most part, the price is starting to trend downward. So even when you're using comps, this card isn't sold in enough volume to probably be the best example for this. But you could use your Luka Prism. You could use your, you could use your insert basketball rookie card here that's available in abundance. Pick one. But the point is, you have at least enough sales there to try to establish some kind of a baseline. You can get rid of outliers. You can do all these different things. Again, we're back to data. But now what about the market psychology piece that I introduced at the beginning with the whole psychology of money thing? Well, the problem is this. If the trend seems to be like it's going up, well, the sellers are thinking in their mind, it doesn't matter what's going on. Oh, the comp says should be about $100, but it's trending upwards. So what if it goes to $125, $130, $140? Maybe I should be offering $120, $125, as a starting point. Well, as a buyer, you're sitting there like, well, the last couple have sold for $100. It's like, well, yeah, but they were selling for $50 a week ago and $25 the week before that. So it's trending upward. And a lot of our data tools are basically being updated daily. Well, that means there's a one-day delay. So what if the player has a career-ending or season-ending injury to last night? Well, by today, we're going to start seeing the impact of that. But the impact may not show up in the tool until tomorrow. Until the next refresh, the next update. Well, instead of something like TerraPeak here, I'm going to be able to see kind of closer to in real time the completed auctions, and I can start seeing that price plummet, suddenly start dropping like a stone. I can see the instantaneous reaction of the market to it. Well, in those data tools, though, it's going to show that it was trending upward, 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 upward. Maybe they were having a career season. The injury, obviously, is going to put a damper on that, but we don't see that reaction in real time. So what's the answer? The answer might be tools that slowly start incorporating more and more real-time data. Well, that's going to increase the accuracy. But at a certain point, the real big problem that all this creates with comps is that you're still looking at a situation where it doesn't matter. You're still should be using it as a guide. It's not the gospel, because you've got all these factors I just threw in there, all these things I just threw into the pot that could potentially be impacting this thing, that are all valid points that could bring the price up, bring the price down. And you're trying to suddenly catch this trend. It's like trying to catch a falling knife. You're most likely to cut your fingers off. It's not something you want to necessarily be trying to do. Using it as a guide at least allows you to try to give yourself a little bit of a buffer, trying to decide for yourself what you want to do. Now, don't forget, a seller has the same capability and the same luxury to be able to try to create their own buffer to try to protect themselves. The end result, though, is that it doesn't matter how much data we have, the more people that get accessibility to this data, and this has been kind of a point that I've alluded to a million times now, but I just want to flat out say, the data tools are great. And I've mentioned before, I do use the card ladder tool. I don't advertise it on here because I'm not in the business of advertising it. I use it for my purposes as a collector to look up certain cards. But the reality is, it's still only a tool in the toolbox. And if you use market movers, it's the same thing, the same concept. You might get certain cards in that one that are not in the other database, but it doesn't really matter. The point is, as long as the data is accurate, the more people are on these platforms, that doesn't give you much of an edge anymore. It really is the equivalent, like I said, of what the old Beckett is. You sit there and you look up something in the Beckett and you see the little down arrow on it. Well, the person beside you who has the same copy of the issue also sees the same card with the same down arrow. How do you interpret that? How do you interpret the market's reaction to that? What does seeing the little down arrow do to them when they're looking at that in the market? If something looks like it's trending downward, the pressure that it puts, the negativity that it puts on it. But then you've got all these players in there who are all trying to decide for themselves, what is my stance on this situation? I am already in for too much. I can't afford to sell it at this price. So I have to hold the line, even though it doesn't make any logical sense, and I should probably cut my losses. That's a psychology piece. Or somebody who got in super low, who's probably willing to go a little bit under current comps just to sell it and take their profit. Well, that's going to mess up the comps a little bit as well. It could be a temporary blip. But for somebody else, depending on the timing of that sale, it could influence them and make them either think things are going down or maybe think things are going up or whatever. The point is that all these variables play into it. And it's a lot more complicated than just looking up the last couple of sales, is what I'm trying to get at. So this whole list of sales here, I've just used it as one illustrative example of something where there's only 8 examples right now. Obviously, it's not the best example. You're probably better off looking up something that has hundreds or thousands of sales over the last couple of months, and you could try to do this exercise for yourself. But the point that I'm trying to get at is, no matter what tool you use, whether it's a free tool, whether it's a paid tool, whether it is whatever, just remember that when you do look up these comps, it is still, at the end of the day, a guide. It's a suggestion. It's something to help you create the basis of your offer or the basis of your selling offer. It's not the be all and end all because of all the reasons that I outlined. Because you could be sitting there, be offering something that's perfectly valid for right now, but if tomorrow's price is already going to be double, and somebody can figure that out, they're going to hold the line on you. Or they'll happily buy it and then turn around and flip it tomorrow when the price doubles. And you're going to have no way of knowing that except when the market reacts. And you're only as good as the data that you have. And even as the data gets better and it gets more accurate and it gets timelier, all that's going to do is it means all the people that have that are going to be in the exact same boat. You're not really going to have much of an edge. Your edge is going to be so small that it's almost not worth discussing. But it's I just wanted to put out a narrative there that kind of countered the whole idea that people were focusing and obsessing about these comps. Because as you watch, we're going to have that Dallas show coming up this weekend here as we talk. And you're going to see a lot of the vlogs and everything. And you're going to see a bunch of people grabbing their phones and then looking up, eBay and looking up their various, market analytics tools and everything and looking up all these prices. And it reinforces this idea that it's the be all and end all looking at these comps. I understand. It is a valuable tool in the toolbox. But I do want to remind and I do want to reemphasize that it is just a tool in the toolbox. And at the end of the day, the psychological aspect is probably the most important piece. And it's probably the one we spend the least amount of time talking about, even though it's the one we probably should spend the most amount of time talking about. Anyway, that's enough of my blathering. I like going a little bit old school and going in a roundabout a little bit on the topic. Anyway, do you have any thoughts on kind of anything I talked about? Comps themselves or any of the psychology part of collecting or buying or selling? Any part of that? Or any questions that you might have that we can address during the live stream. So you have to let me know. The live stream will be, I'll quickly go back to that tab one more time. It's going to be at 9:30 p.m. Eastern time on Friday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, and we're going to go online here and we'll have ourselves a little chat. So usually I do bring up a lot of the stuff that the chat talks about. We can talk about anything related to the hobby that you guys want to discuss, new, old, or indifferent. And also we'll chat about whatever else you guys want to talk about. It'll be a good time. We'll sit there, have some fun, and hang out. Anyway, that'll be it for me this time around. Thanks as always. If you made it to the end, let me know that you made it to the end. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Hit the like button if you haven't done that. And we'll catch you in the next one.